So I'm just going to flag 5 or 6, and Joy, I'm sure you'll add more. And this is not, I mean, of course, welcome to have comments also, but this is just providing our perspective on something. It seems to me that one of the 5, 6 I can think of, the first one that kind of seemed to be cutting across many or most of the papers was the need for decentralization. This was of politics, of economics, of technologies, when we heard about energy and handlooms and crafts, of skills, of the localization for basic needs, bazaars versus markets. There was this sort of thread running through of a much more decentralized society in all these different forms. Combined with which was, of course, democratization of the means of production, much deeper or more radical, more participatory processes of decision making, Swaraj, radical social democracy, etc., self-determination. These were all things that came in. They came into politics, knowledge, law, arts, consumption. So this combination of decentralization and democratization towards a much more people-centered way of living was something that I think was quite prominent in the last 2.5 years and has been in the essays that we've been reading. But then, of course, the relationship between this, the sort of decentralized units of decision making and economies to the larger systems, the larger political, economic, social systems, is something that needs to be thought through. We're talking about embedded democracies, embedded economies, oceanic circles, somebody had mentioned, accountability of structures at the larger level, the role of the state to the extent that it continues, how do you make that more transparent, accountable, etc. What are the levels of larger decision making, the question of ecologically set or ecologically and culturally set political boundaries. So beginning to question even the political boundaries we have right now within and outside the nation, and things like that. So this sort of deeper, direct, local units of decision making and their relationship with the larger one all the way to the globe was also something that was, I think, quite interesting that was emerging. Third, as part of this, again, the relationship between the rural and the urban. And recognizing that the distinction between rural and urban is very fuzzy now. It's more of a continuum: rural, urban, peri-urban, urban, etc., etc. So, but clearly also that the urban is currently parasite on the rural in sort of broad terms. How does one change that relationship, both by changing the structures and the sort of relationships within the cities, and the relationship between the city and the village? Recognizing again that these are not necessarily very distinct units. The challenge of livelihoods. This is something I think that was very interesting, because in a world which is supposedly more and more modern, the kind of stuff that we heard from Ilse and others, or the pastoralists, we didn't unfortunately get the Adivasis point of view, but small peasants, pastoralists, fisher folk, Adivasis, etc., in very large numbers obviously continue to exist, and the ability for them to continue to exist in the kind of world that we're living in is, of course, hard. It's getting more and more undermined. So the issue of the rights to different and diverse livelihoods and the conditions in which those livelihoods could be dignified, have viable returns, and be seen as respected occupations and respected livelihoods is again something that I thought was very valuable coming out of this. In a number of the papers also, both the ones presented here and the ones that we've read as in the essays that did not get represented because people were not here, the issue of diversity and pluralism. So whether it's the diversity, again, as I said, of livelihoods, but also the diversities of just ways of being, ways of living, ways of working, ways of expressing ourselves, ideologies, ways of earning a livelihood, language, culture, identity, the whole idea of multiple identities, that, and of course the diversity of ecologies, of crops, of livestock, of ecosystems, etc. So how does that actually fit again into a future vision? And also in a way that diversity is not divisionary. That we're not then talking about pluralism and diversity as being something which becomes conflictual between the different identities, but actually becomes and truly a multiple identity kind of future. Knowledge, I thought, was something that came up very frequently, not just in the paper by Rajesh, but generally as an issue. And the current tension between traditional knowledge and modern knowledge, these are complex categories, I'm using them in simplistic forms, but the current tensions and how do you actually move away from those tensions and create a system of integrated multiple knowledge forms which respect each other, and therefore the practitioners of those knowledge or the holders of those knowledge also become much more respected than is currently the case, where only one form of knowledge is dominating. But then also perspectives coming out like democratizing and making much more commons the generation of knowledge, the distribution of knowledge, the use of knowledge, the holding of knowledge, and the sort of continuous generation of that knowledge. So democratizing science and technology, democratizing other forms of knowledge. Justice, equality and equity, because when we talk about decentralization, democratizing, I think we've been continuously reminded in these 3 days, and of course have to be, that simply because we localize or provide more power to a community, however we define it, doesn't necessarily mean that issues of injustice and exploitation will be addressed. In fact, sometimes they will become worse. So, very squarely putting justice, equality, equity, dignity, inclusion, etc. into all of this is again it's a big challenge. But how does one do that? And that also includes, of course, secure access to conditions of health, to learning opportunities. I hesitate to say education because that becomes a difficult, complex word, but learning, better social relationships, families that don't, their power equations, what I was talking about, are not the ones that rule, but more love or affection and generosity and things like that. So, justice, equality kind of covers a whole lot of these things. Last couple of points here, which is that this is something we've been saying, but of course it doesn't necessarily, there's no necessary agreement on this, is that where is then the locus of all of this? Is it the state? Is it the corporation? I think everybody in this room would agree that it will not be the corporation, the private corporation. Or is it the community? Defined in many different ways. It doesn't necessarily the old rural, local village community. It could also be that, but not necessarily, because we know that's it's distorted also in some parts of India. The urban neighborhood, the student community in a university, maybe even some virtual communities, if not Facebook. In some way or the other, a collective of people which defines itself as a community, which identifies itself with other people as part of the community, becoming the locus of society, the locus of decision making, the locus of economy, and making a state accountable, is an idea that I think a number of us put forward, but whether there's general agreement or not, of course I'm not trying to push that. And if so, then is there still a role for the state? Aditya said he's more of an anarchist, and probably so am I, and maybe a number of others here. Others feel that no, the state needs to continue and has a very crucial role. Some people said maybe in the interim there is a role, but not necessarily in the long term. So, these are sort of again very complex and contested issues. But I think generally, hopefully, there's agreement that the community, defined in various ways, has a very, very crucial role in all of this. We're talking about decentralization and democratization. Last, and of course, underpinning all of this, the ecological foundations. Obviously, we cannot forget that. So, whether we're talking about power or economy or politics or whatever, without sustaining the earth, we're not going to sustain ourselves. So, by the way, the sustainability as a word, just as an aside, it's very interesting that the origin of it comes from sub-tenere, or sub-tenere, the Latin. So, sub means under, so from below, and tenere is tenure, hold, to hold. So it's probably not such a dirty word. If we are able to rescue it from, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals mafia that has captured it. So anyway, so the ecological foundations, environmentalism, Sharad put it, ecologism as others do, ecosophy as I think Asim is working on, and many others. So looking at how the ecological conditions of our existence actually become something that is cutting across all of this. Oneness with nature, with the rest of nature, within nature, etc., and climate sanity instead of climate chaos. Let me end by actually saying that I think one of the things we've been trying to do is to say what fundamental ethics and values underlie all of this. So Milun, for instance, mentioned dignity as sort of fundamental to human rights. And one of the things we've been trying to do in the Vikalp Sangam process, which is in the note that we circulated to all of you, is to evolve this set of basic ethics and principles, emerging from practice on the ground, from indigenous views, from mainstream ideologies, etc., etc. And so you have it in front of you. I'm not going to go through all of it, but ecological integrity, rights of nature, equity, justice, inclusion, diversity, pluralism, resilience, self-reliance, simplicity, sufficiency, dignity. I mean, these are sort of very basic ethics that I think it's very important for us to articulate and to some extent agree on some sort of a framework, because that's what, to me, would be the most powerful challenge to the current dominant system, which is really a set of ethics and or non-ethics and principles which are against all of this, which is individualization, privatization, being, etc., etc. So that to me kind of, and I kind of heard these terms off and on again in the last 3 days, and others which we need to include. Lastly, the need for some sort of integrated theory or synthesis arising out of all of this. This is a challenge that actually we have been often confronted with when people say, okay, we're reading a framework note, it's nice, and we're talking about alternatives and so on, but what's the theory underlying this? And I personally at least feel myself completely unable to do that. But it would be great if some of you can actually do it. So maybe Bharatji, you can develop, or Aditya, you can sort of develop your papers into looking at what would be a theoretical basis for all of this put together, which takes from the existing ideological and theoretical frameworks that we have. Incidentally also adds, and that would be a comment to both of you, indigenous or community practitioners' theories or their own knowledge system theories. They also do have, except that we don't recognize them because they don't put them in theoretical frameworks. But I have, for instance, spoken with Devaji Tofa of Menhaleka village at length, and it's incredible how much theorizing he can do in his own language, of course. So maybe also building on that is something that's a challenge that we should.
I think Ashish has covered most of the important concerns that were expressed in the last 2.5 days, which will help us to anchor this whole thing in a more unified manner, bringing that without imposing maybe into a rigid framework or thing. Just one thing was that one was coming through time and again, two things, especially when we talk about decentralization, democratization, other type of thing. I think one of the things which came up from various other papers was that I think, though we accept, the need to go beyond binaries, I think that was one thing. We talked about knowledge, for example. The whole issue was not fixed as modern versus traditional or indigenous and things, but the whole issue was that how do you integrate things. Or in terms of decision making, resource allocation, access, the whole relationship between the local and exogenous. Not to see us on opposite to the other, but then how do you reverse this relationship in which we do offer a primacy to the local units in terms of in the spirit of subsidiarity and other things. But we don't deny that there is a need to have some access to resources, which is also people's right to get access to coming from either supra-local sources or centralized or other types of. So I think this relationship is important to explain. The second thing was what is the whole unit? I think there was an interesting discussion about do we shift to biocultural type of entities for decision making and other type of things. I think your earlier book, I think both of you also talk about that in a great way and things. But I think there was an understanding, there was not too much of a discussion to shift from the present administrative or political boundaries to for units to maybe shifting to much more of a biophysical and cultural boundaries as maybe limits to things. I think some of these things I think came up with this. The other thing is in terms of the 2.5 days of dialogue, I think it had contributed to 3 sets of things. One is that I think it did help to the whole vision part. I think with different dimensions which were not maybe covered in the present papers, I think that got problematized as well as got discussed. Second, I think the first takes up this issue of setting the boundary conditions. I think that was very sharply came out. So I don't know whether individual authors are going to define their boundary conditions each of the chapters. Probably that is needed to some extent as a starting point for that visioning. But I think in the introductory piece also probably we will also try to make that boundary condition more explicit. And I think the concern, which Ashish will. The third concern I think was the whole pathway to get there to some extent. I think sometimes in the present set of essays is rather uneven at the moment. Some people are really engaged, some people are not. So probably some understanding about, I think, this 2.5 days discussions did give that type of pointers to this. I think that is how I would see that the takeaways for me from this thing which will help us the whole book much over this. In terms of when Ashish approached asked me whether I would be interested to get into this project. In fact, Jayendra was there, but was the earlier person what they were trying to do. I know for me it was also a bit of a natural extension in terms of 2 things. One is that I also belong to a political tradition in which many of us are sharing here, like Bharat, Anand, Mani, Gail, to a tradition in which we are made to a point that while mobilizing the rural toilers, I think this was search for alternatives. People saw it as one of the defining things in our political work itself. So I thought this is gives a chance for me to look at various things and try to bring. And also in terms of water and energy, which the research small institute which I am part of, we have been also trying to articulate alternatives along with the people's technology. So I thought this in a way natural progression for me to get into this. So that's why I don't regret it. The type of essays which I have never, type of issues which have been brought together through these essays and the people. Some of them I know, but many of the people I have mostly interacted with the first time, it has been very enriching and things, so it was a personal test. And in this also, I think there is one small quotation from D.D. Kosapi which has helped me to get into this area, and book is that from his work on the culture and the ancient civilization, I think that book. The golden age, if any, lies in the future and not in the past. I think time and again this type of idea was coming through and things, and I think it is for us to create or shape that. So for me, this type of effort is at least contribute, whatever humble manner, to shape a different future, and I think we would consider this as a beginning of that. Okay, thanks.